Pete. This is lighting and rendering. We're going to look at compositing today, and we're going to see how we can use Photoshop to blend images together based on some of the different shaders that we used for our scene. Quickly, let's have a look at what compositing is. Compositing is a process or technique of combining visual elements from separate sources into single images, often creating the illusion that all of those elements are part of the same scene. So we see this a lot with Hollywood movies, especially in movies that are heavy with effects, robots, monsters, Marvel films. And so this is one of the famous studios called Weta. All of these elements are made probably in 3D, and then combining them all together. It's all different layers, as you can see, and they break it down. So you can see how they're using this chroma effect and all of the 3D animation, putting them together, all the particles, all the smoke, and creating the final output, which we see. So it looks pretty realistic. Looks like things are happening there. The haze, different effects like that, the lighting, it all matches and it all works, and that's how they do it. The other thing too to note is sometimes when you're rendering, as you saw, you can't render the entire scene in one go, and this is another way to solve it, is to render it in passes. So you have light pass, you could have the color pass, you have the smoke pass. When I was making one of my short films, I also had to create passes. So I oftentimes have a background pass that was different from my foreground pass, my character pass as well, because if I rendered it all at the same time, it actually would crash my computer. So that's a major reason for compositing as well. It's also logistical, not only for aesthetic purposes. To show you what I have rendered so far, I have a background for 2 different shots, and I also have my main character also in those 2 different shots, so 2 different camera positions, one with halftone and one with toon shader. So I'm going to just show you how we could do, let's say, the close-up. I think that's more interesting than the long shot, and I'm going to bring those into Photoshop. Now again, you don't have to do compositing in layers with foreground and background, but you can, and I think there's a lot more control there, as I will demonstrate in Photoshop. So here we have the character, it's toon shaded with a JPEG. There's the halftone there too. Notice too that I have a white background, so this might be an issue, but I'm going to use the halftone and bring this into the JPEG, and I'll just try to snap it in. So now it's snapped in, and now we have something like this happening. From here we can then change the different, so I think a multiply looks pretty good already. You can change the opacity there and see the difference as I bring it in. There's different parts that I don't like about this, especially around the eye, so I can mask this out. Let's go ahead and bring in my other background, and I'll just drop this in, and I'll put this behind the background. Right now we can't, so I'll need to double click or click on the lock, and now the lock is there, and now we can put the background behind layer 0. So that's one little thing. Now we have to just make sure that this will all work together. So as you can see as I go over it, there is going to be some crazy overlap here. So I'm going to have to go over the white on this character and delete the background. Since it's all white, we can use the magic wand. It's right over here. And I'm clicking and holding it down. It's W on the keyboard. But I click and hold it down. There's the magic wand now. And I can delete the background this way. I'm going to make sure my tolerance is set to 10, so I can type in 10, and that should give us enough to be able to delete the background without deleting the character. So you can see here too that this is pretty close to white around the arm and the skin, but it seems to be holding up pretty well. And so there is now the background showing, and here's a little piece here too that I'll need to delete. And now we are looking, it looks like it's all in one shot. So again, I'll bring this back in, and now we have our look. There's a number of ways we can remove this kind of effect that's happening on the face. We could just use the eraser tool and erase out this like that. Okay, so that's one way we could do it. It's a little sloppy, so instead I'll create a mask. So over here we can create a mask and remove the dots on the face. So this is for, as you can see here, vibrance, things like that. We can make some adjustments as an adjustment layer, but we just want to create a mask here. And so now we're over the mask, and if we paint in black, that will remove whatever's on that layer. Okay, so I'm going to use the brush tool, B for brush, and then I will use the brackets. So the bracket next to P on the keyboard allows us to then resize the brush. And as you can see, I have my hardness set to 43. It can make it a little bit less hard, and so that way it fades quite nicely into the head. And I can remove this one as well. So there we go. We were able to apply a mask, and this mask is non-destructive. So at any point, if I ever want to bring it back, I just switch to white as my brush, and I can brush it back in like that. Okay, so again, black will remove whatever's on the layer. Think of tape, for example, black tape, putting over it something, and white tape will then, again, brush can bring that back. Bring that back in. Just make sure you are on the mask layer and not over the RGB layer, because you can draw over the RGB layer and not realize you're actually drawing over it, like I am showing you there. So make sure you're on this layer, and as you draw it in, you can make some changes to it. The other nice thing you can also do is you can fake bokeh, and bokeh is the idea of portraits. Here is just, again, screenshot if you're not familiar with bokeh and simulating portrait mode on your phone, especially the newest ones. You see here on the left hand side, it's very, very detailed in the background, but if you look at the right hand side, you know, it shows more emphasis on the main character. We can do the same thing with Gaussian blur in Photoshop. And so here's my layer. Notice too that I have some foreground elements here right on this side. So we could duplicate this, Control J, and on that layer, and then use the lasso tool and just draw around the tree. So we're not going to blur the tree, we're just going to blur everything around it. And I'm just going to eyeball it. And so there's going to be some craziness happening here. It doesn't have to be totally accurate, since, you know, my background is already kind of wild. And there is now my foreground, which I can then hit Control X. I want to make a new layer, and then Control Shift V, which pastes in place. And now when I add the Gaussian blur to my layer 2, my foreground tree won't be blurry. And so then I can go to Filter, go to Blur, find Gaussian blur, and you can see that the Gaussian blur is affecting it this way. So again, I didn't do a perfect cutout of my tree. It still works, kind of, and it's a little exaggerated on the radius there, but if I put it to 2 or 3, you know, I think that looks pretty good, and it creates a lot of depth and a lot of interesting final image to my composite. So again, I'm using Toon Shader, the contours, using all the different types of shaders, and I'm combining them into through Photoshop. I can then hit Control Shift S. You should save this anyway. Give it a name and save it out as a JPEG. So this is my 2 final. Again, always follow the naming structure. So it's going to be your name, and this is what you'd submit. And the name of mine is maybe, she's not really a jungle girl, but it's maybe a forest girl. All right, and there it is. So there you go, using compositing different layers. You don't have to do it this way, but you can see the amount of control, and it creates a really unique and rich image. I would hope that you would also use this for your final images for your assignment. So keep learning. Professor Pete.